This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Yes. So we're talking, I'm not going to translate, but we can, if you want to look inside the verses, you can look at the words. So we're talking about a situation when this is in a time when we're talking, this is really in times when the Shemitah year, the Jubilee year, the Yovel year was still observed in the land of Israel. And there were many laws, many mitzvahs that applied then, don't really apply in today's times until the entire Jewish people will be living in Israel, or the majority of the Jewish people, and the temple is built, and there's the Sanhedrin, the central court. That's when many of these mitzvahs could be done again. But the Torah is talking about a case when a Jew, somebody who's living in Israel, becomes very poor and sells themselves as a slave to a non-Jew. The verse, we will read. Let's read inside. Chisasig, this is verse 47, chapter 25, verse 47. So the chisasig yad ger v'toshav imach, when if a resident, a non-Jewish resident, gains wealth with you, among the Jewish people, or mach achicha ima, and your fellow Jew becomes needy by being associated with him, and he sells himself to the non-Jewish master. So he becomes poor, he becomes needy. He sells himself to the non-Jewish master. And the verse continues, or to idols or to idol worshippers. So the next verse tells us, as soon as he is sold, he should be redeemed. One of his fellow Jews should redeem him. So we shouldn't let the situation go on as it is, even though he himself sold himself to a non-Jewish master. But it's not an ideal situation. Jewish people are living in Israel. This person shouldn't be a slave to a non-Jewish master. So there's a mitzvah on his fellow Jews to redeem him. Pidyon shvuyim, to redeem, even if he's not in prison, even if he's just working for him, but it's a mitzvah to redeem him, to pay for his worth and to get him back. The verse continues, 49. Either his cousin, either his uncle or his cousin should redeem him, or from somebody else, from his relatives, from his family, should redeem him, or he himself will make enough money to be able to redeem himself. So there are different situations that could happen. In verse 48, the verse tells us one of his brothers will redeem him. Echad me'echav, one of his brothers, which is also could be explained to mean his fellow Jews, but it literally means one of his brothers. And then the verse continues and says in verse 49, or his uncle, or his cousins, or a different relative, or if nobody else redeems him, then he himself will redeem himself. Now the next few verses I'm not going to read inside, but basically the Torah tells us that if nobody redeems him, and he doesn't redeem himself, he's not going to be a slave forever. When the Jubilee year, when the Yovel year comes, he will go free. So this is a time when the Jubilee year was still observed in the land of Israel, and all the Jewish people were living in Israel, and they wouldn't just observe this sabbatical year, which is still observed in today's times, and that's spoken about at the beginning of the parsha, but they'll also be observing the Jubilee year, which is the 50th year, and 7 times 7. So when we get to 49 years, the 50th year is the Yovel year, and in that year, all slaves go back home to the families that they came from. Whether they were Jewish masters or non-Jewish masters. So this slave who's a Jewish slave to a non-Jewish master will also return back to his home. Now it's interesting the order that the verse uses. First it says his brother, one of his brothers, will redeem him. Then it says his uncle, then his cousin, then any other relatives, and then it goes back to himself. So it seems like we're moving away as in the close relatives. We start off with the closest, the brother. Then we go to an uncle who's next along the line, or a cousin. And if no first cousin, then it would be a distant cousin, one of his relatives. But the verse doesn't say first he himself will redeem himself. Most probably, if we're talking about the closeness of the relatives, he's the closest to himself. So he should, if he's able to afford, he should first redeem himself. And if he's not, then let his close relatives redeem himself. But instead, the verse puts himself at the end. And also, a father is missing over here. Only has a brother. So usually a father would be close to considered. 1 second, David. A parent would be a closer relative to a child for this purpose than a sibling. So why does it first speak about a sibling before speaking and doesn't speak about a parent? Go on, David.
So because I don't read the Hebrew and I'm only looking at the English translation that's also in yours, then the way you frame the question doesn't make sense from the English translation I have. And let me say why. Because the first thing is that they say the fellow Jews should redeem him, not his brother. And you said it says brother, but apparently in this translation, they believe it meant Jews. And then it also says he can only redeem himself if his own hand would acquire wealth. So that's already a stipulation that says he can't just do it. He needs the money or else he wouldn't. So the question you framed, when I read this, it seems it needs a different framing or there's something wrong with this English translation. And so I'm just confused.
Go on, Shira.
So it says, Echad me'achiv. So that means, David, one of his brothers. So it could be that this particular translation expanded literally the word brothers to mean a fellow Jew. That's
right.
I don't know why they would do that. It says achiv, that means.
I think it's the oral Torah. So I believe that the reason that what's that?
It says literally one of his brothers.
I know, but I believe that when they give an English translation that isn't that, they're drawing upon the oral Torah as part of this, I believe. And so we don't always take the written Torah literally because it can't be understood without the oral, is my understanding. And so that's why I'm questioning, that's why I'm going with this translation, is that I don't think they did it by mistake. I think there was an intention in how they did this. That's at least been my experience with this particular, this is a Chabad Chumash, right? So
right. So you're both right. I mean, I don't know exactly. I'm not sure if that's clearly the oral Torah. Either way, it's clear that somebody should redeem him. So in the next verse, we go and we continue to talk about all different possibilities. But it's very possible. But often when the Torah says one of his brothers means our fellow brothers and sisters, our fellow Jews, our fellow brothers and sisters. So it could make sense that it's talking about. I think it's important. Let me frame this question. It's not so much of it's not necessarily a real question. In other words, it's not a question of like, how could it not say himself after it talks about his family members? Yeah. There's a nuance there's a point over here that the verse is coming to tell us something deeper. And was also noticed is it doesn't say father. Okay, if it's fellow Jews, Echad me'achav means one of his fellow Jews, then why does the verse have to tell us his cousin and his uncle and his other distant relatives? They're all included in fellow Jews. That kind of reestablishes what Shira is saying, that it means literally brothers.
But when I read Rashi and how he unpacks it, nothing is as simple as it sounds in the literal. And they always look at the wording from one place and another place in the Torah. And so I don't believe I have the Torah knowledge to use my rational mind to come to a conclusion on this, because I know how they analyze it. So, yeah. So
I'm not going to answer the question either from necessarily a rational, simplistic way of,
yeah,
the nuance of each verse, of each word, and why it speaks about these relatives and not other relatives. That's not necessarily what we're getting into. What we are bringing out of here is the fact that it uses the word which would usually mean brothers before it talks about himself. Himself is right at the end. If he can afford it, then he will do it himself. But probably if he's able to afford it, he would come first before anybody else. Then the next person along would be his parent, his father, or his child, which according to Jewish law would be the inheritor, would be his inheritor. And then would be a sibling, which is the next along. We're closer to our children than we are to our siblings.
but if he could afford it, he wouldn't be a slave. So I don't get that. It makes no sense to me.
He'll make the money through working for his master to be able to afford it. You're right. It will come later. It won't happen right away. So if somebody else would redeem him, the rabbi points that out, if somebody else would redeem him first, then he would never end up in that situation. That could be an answer. Yeah.
But if he's working as a slave, can he make his own money?
Interesting question. I was thinking the same thing. I guess the situation over here is that he is able to somehow make his own money. Maybe he works overtime. Maybe in other words, maybe there's an agreement. I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, otherwise, how else would it be? If he sold himself as a slave because he had no money, then how would he be able to afford it? So it's a question on the verse. In other words, it's not a question. And how do we understand how would that happen? If there's, based on what you're saying, Noga, if he's a slave, he wouldn't make his own money, then he would never make his own money. So how would he ever be able to afford it? Maybe he would. One of his primary inheritor would pass away, and he would inherit a bunch of money from someone, from his father, or
no. I think debtors and
then
others,
he would have new money that he would be able to afford.
No, I think the way it worked is debtors and others sold themselves into slavery so they could make the money to buy themselves back out. I think that's just what that was.
What?
Mm-hmm.
They sold themselves. You're basically selling yourself as a servant.
Yeah.
And you're living in the house, but you're making money so you can buy yourself back out of that. You aren't doing that forever.
But
It could be that, but usually, literally, like Noga's saying, literally, as slaves usually means that they have no entity for themselves, so they don't make anything.
If you're captured in a war, that's true, but not if you sell yourself into slavery. In my understanding, I've seen it other places. I think, because if you're selling yourself into slavery, it makes no sense if you can't ever get out of that.
Could be true.
The only time that I know of people, I mean, I didn't really study this, so I don't know what really happened, but my understanding is that people did sell themselves or somebody from their family as slaves to pay a debt or something, or to be able to feed themselves. But then to get the person out of debt, they would have to make the money to buy themselves back. So if
they would make their own money, or somebody else would make the money.
Yeah.
So like the daughter that gets sold in that as a servant either has to marry into the family or get given money when she leaves. And so they always had ways. There's like in the Jewish law, there's different ways that works.
Well, I know there's the law that it says here in the Bible. It does say that if you have a slave, you have to give him money when he leaves you. But it doesn't say it on this thing here, what we're reading now.
Right. So how would you understand it, Noga? The words "ohi sigayado v'negal."
I'm just kind of nuts. I don't understand. If he has money, why would he become a slave in the first place?
Right.
Histigayado means that he makes enough money to redeem himself.
Oh, it says, השיגה ידו ונגאל.
Yeah. So I'm answering even according to what you're saying, that maybe he is a slave that isn't making his own money. I think David is probably right over here that he, in this situation, because he wasn't being sold as a captive, he's being sold. He's choosing willingly to sell himself. It's part of the purpose of being sold is in order to make money, not just to be living in somebody else's house because he can't afford to pay his own expenses, and he's completely given over to the master. So he is making his own money. But even if we're going to say that he is a true slave, meaning that he's not making his own money, maybe his father passes away and leaves him an inheritance, in which case now he can buy himself back. So that's just a way to possibly answer, even according to what you're saying.
Well, according to my translation, it says, if his own hand will acquire wealth.
Yeah, it's
So-
true. It's true.
So that
Yeah.
sounds, that doesn't sound like it's a gift.
It's not a
No,
gift.
but-
Inheritance is not a gift. Yeah. Okay.
No, but-
Anyway,
No, but the Hebrew says, if it says, השיגה ידו ונגאל, השיג ידו, it doesn't mean that he has to make the money. It's somehow the money came to
yeah,
him.
yeah. The word it could also mean that he got the money. In other words, his hands got. Hisiga yado means literally it means his hands got hold of money.
Right.
So yeah. An interesting thing. So if we look in the first verse, it says who are the different people he could become sold to? Who's he becoming a slave to? In verse 47, yeah, it says your machachichim of the nimkar leger toshav. He gets sold either to a ger toshav, which means a non-Jew who's living in Israel,
Yeah.
or leeker mishpachat ger. What does this mean? What do these words mean? Or leeker mishpachat ger.
Somebody from a family of a convert.
Yeah, so ger over here doesn't mean convert, as like ger toshav doesn't either mean convert. Ger toshav
Right.
means
So it could be
settler. A
settler,
settler.
yeah.
Yeah. So so Rashi says, Mishpachat Ger. This refers to idol worship.
Oh,
Yeah. And when it says Aker, it means idol worship. He gets sold for idol worship. He gets sold. Aker means idol worship, which means not that he's literally going to have to serve the idol. Not that he's going to have to worship the idol, that he's going to have to help serve the idol worship. Meaning, Rashi says, for example, to chop wood and draw water to be brought for the idol. So he doesn't actually serve the idol. The non-Jew is serving the idol.
mhm.
And he's being sold to the non-Jew, who then takes the work that he's doing. His job is to be the cleaner, or the shamash, the worker in the house of idol worship. And commentaries struggle to understand. So why is Rashi choosing this explanation for Eker Mishpachat Ger? Why does it mean idol worship?
I don't know.
Because if the point, if the point is really to bring out that he's getting to a negative place spiritually. So all of this was happening over here is not just a physical, somebody, it isn't just a material. Somebody becomes poor, and then they have to sell themselves and whatever else. What's happening over here is there's actually a downfall, going lower and lower down, further away, distancing oneself from Hashem. Later on, I believe it is right. Is it right after this or before this? Maybe. Rashi says, at the beginning of the next chapter, he says, if we look at this week's parsha, so there's two parshas this week actually, Bahar and Bechokot. But if we look at the first parsha, which is Bahar, and we look through the different things that are discussed in the parsha, we see a theme of things getting worse and worse and worse. Because the last part of the chapter talks about idol worship. And it says, the Torah says you shouldn't have idols. Why shouldn't you? What is the Torah telling us? We've heard this already a few times that we can't serve idols. What is the point over here? This is talking about, Rashi says, somebody who has been sold to a non-Jew. And let's say sold even for the purpose of working to help get ready to help be the shamash, the one who prepares the wood or the water for the idols. And what this person will say is, my master serves idols, so I should also serve idols. This is where I belong. This is where I am now. I'm no longer among my people. I live in this place. I work for this purpose. So if my master does it, I could do it also, or I should do it also. And he talks about other things also, like it speaks about observing Shabbat over here. Also, at the end of the parsha, the last verse of the parsha. My master doesn't keep Shabbat, so why should I keep Shabbat? And Rashi says that this, I think it's from the Talmud, based on what it says in the Kiddushin in the Talmud, that this parsha is talking about a spiritual downfall. That the beginning part of the parsha is talking about the sabbatical year, Shavuot, and the fact that we shouldn't worry about observing the sabbatical year, because Hashem is going to give us the blessings. Hashem is going to provide for us. If we don't work the land during that year, even though it might seem scary that we're neglecting our land and we're letting strangers walk inside of it and take the fruit, ultimately Hashem is going to give us the blessing that we're not going to only have blessing for 1 year. He's going to give us blessing for 3 years, the year beforehand, the year of, and the year after, that we're going to have abundance of blessing in order to be able to provide for ourselves. But there might be a situation when somebody is going to not listen to Hashem, not have the trust in God that they're supposed to, and will disobey the laws of Shavuot, of sabbatical year. I'll do some work in the land. The next thing that the Torah talks about after that is sales, selling one's belongings to another. That's later on in the parsha. Talks about when a person sells their belongings to another. And the next thing it talks about is when a person sells their field, their land to another. So if a person is going to disobey the Shavuot, eventually what's going to happen is they're going to have to sell their belongings because they're not going to have any money. And then they're still holding on to their land, they're still holding on to their property. But if they continue to forget about Hashem, to forget that Hashem is providing for us, then they're going to have to sell their field also, sell their land. And eventually they're going to have to sell their home. This is the order of the different topics that are spoken about in the parsha. Sabbatical year, selling one's belongings, selling one's field, selling one's home. The next thing it talks about is interest. Then they're going to have to borrow money. And they're going to be charged interest. The Torah tells us that a Jew is not allowed to charge another Jew interest.
Are you now in Bechukotai?
No, we're in Bahar. We're going through Bahar.
Still Behar, okay.
Yeah. This is just Bahar. I'm not just focusing on Bahar this week. Yeah.
Okay.
So things keep on getting worse. First, they have to sell their belongings, then their home, their field, and their home. Then they have to borrow money, and they get charged interest. And eventually, they can't pay the debt. He has no money left. He has no belongings. He has no land. He has no home. So how does he pay? So he has to sell himself as a slave.
Right.
And eventually, he even has to sell himself as a slave to a non-Jew.
So you see, so if this is the way it's happening, then where's he going to get the money to redeem himself?
You're asking a very technical question.
Yeah.
I'm getting more now into the spiritual and downfall that the person is going through, which is spoken about in the parsha.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this also answers a technical question, which is there's something that the Torah is telling us. Here we're talking about redeeming. It's coming out of that.
Mhm.
So there's something deeper over here also. What's the spiritual downfall? What's happening?
Well, they're not following God's commands and God's map.
We mentioned that the verse doesn't say, it doesn't include a parent. It talks about a brother, a sibling, or a cousin, or an uncle. It doesn't talk about a parent. It's because a parent, we say that Hashem is Avinu Shabashamayim, our Father in heaven. Actually, now tonight, they're already celebrating Lag BaOmer in Meron, in Israel.
Yeah.
So they're singing of the song Avinu Shabashamayim, Avinu Shabashamayim, Avinu Shabashamayim, Avinu. So one of the songs that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai talks about purifying ourselves through our Father in heaven purifies ourselves.
Let's just hope that they don't have any terrible things happen this year.
God forbid. Wow. Yeah. I have two brothers that are on the way, or they're there already. Anyways,
Tell them to be careful.
I will do. I mean, they're being careful. The whole place has been rebuilt, and there's been a lot. There's been a lot of. I know that it's been a lot of politics around getting ready for Lag BaOmer in Israel. So I'm sure everyone will be okay. With all they couldn't find an insurance company to take responsibility. Don't ask. Anyways, but the government is, I think, overseeing it now.
Well, they were overseeing it then. It's just people wouldn't listen to them.
Neglect, yeah. So getting back to, so we say our Father in heaven, yeah. It says in Malachi and the prophets, it says, Hashem is talking. He says, the son respects his father. If I'm the father, where's my respect? So just like we're commanded to love and fear, we spoke last week about respecting our parents, to love and fear our father and mother. We're also commanded to love and fear Hashem, who is our father, and to respect Hashem.
Mhm.
This is based on verses in the Bible. It also says in Chassidus that there's the three parts of our understanding, right? Chabad, Chachma, Bina, Dat. Chachma is don't pounce on me, David, if I don't explain Chachma exactly the right way, because we're not getting into details over here. We're focusing more on the general idea. Chachma is kind of is a transmission from God where we kind of get an idea, we understand something, but we only understand it on it fell into place, but we don't fully grasp it. We can't really, it's not integrated. Bina is where we take it down into details and we take it apart. And then Dat is where we resonate with it and attach ourselves to it. So here we talk about Chachma and Bina. It says in Tanya, Chachma is the father and Bina is the mother. Right? The fetus, the child, there's a drop of semen that comes from the father. So there's that drop, there's that tiny dot of something, which is the kind of the source of the being, of the idea, or in this, whatever it is. And then you've got, then the fetus spends 9 months inside of the mother's womb where they grow into a full-on person, get all of their senses and they begin to breathe and everything else. So Bina really takes time. Bina is where it's extrapolated, it's integrated, it's understood, it's taken apart. It says in Tanya, it says in Chassidus in general, that belief in God, Emunah, is the idea of the Father, because it's not something that we can touch with our hands. It's not something that we can fully grasp and make logical. It's above our minds. Even if we could understand it, there are parts of it which are above us. Accepting Hashem means accepting something which is higher than us. And every person has a certain awareness of the higher being, an awareness of Hashem inside of them, which is our connection to our Chachma, to that drop, that feeling that we have to Hashem, that deeper transmission we have from God, and which brings us to have belief in God, which is our Jewish soul. But there are times when that is quieted down, when that is shut down. We shut down that part of ourselves. So he compares it over here to sleeping, to falling asleep. So when a person falls asleep, their deeper parts of themselves, or to say their logic, or the things that are more refined, are not properly functioning. So the body is functioning, they're breathing, their body is there, and everything is there, but their mind is not working fully. Similarly, over here, when a person loses their awareness of their emunah, of their feeling, of their connection to Hashem, their belief in Hashem, which is above logic, their father inside of them, their chachma, of his chachma, then it's as if they're sleeping. And that's when we're able to do things that are against our value system, to do things which are against Hashem or against who we truly are. We always have those challenges where we might be pulled to do something which is against our values. There are things which are against big values, and there are things which are against small values. So it's not in my, let's say it's not in my value system to be wasting time right now, or to be looking at this or reading this, or spending time doing whatever it is. But it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. But then there's values which I can't go against those values. That's who I am. But they're all who I am. Ultimately, whenever a person violates Hashem's wish, Hashem's will, it's the same disconnect. It's a disconnect from God. Whether it's a big one or a small one, whether it's bowing down to idols or something smaller, they're all violating God's will. They're all disconnecting ourselves from Hashem. So, but for some reason, our minds tell us this is a big deal. This I can't do. But this, not such a big deal. Not the end of the world. Mm-hmm. Why? Because a certain part of our awareness is shut down. We're asleep. We've lost a certain part of our awareness. We haven't lost it. We've just shut it down. We've shut down the Father inside of us. We've shut down the emunah, the belief in God, the deeper transmission that we have from Hashem. We have shut it down. There are times when it will get awakened. When will it get awakened? If something big comes up. For example, there are many, many Jews over the ages who gave up their lives not to bow down to the cross, because this was putting to test their biggest values. And when those big values when those feelings were awakened, then there was no way they were going to go against God, even with one act, even with just bowing down. It's just bowing down. It's not a big deal. We're not asking you to put your head and heart into it. Just bow down. No, because this is a big value. And a big value, it hits my core on a deeper level, but really it's all the same thing. It's all a disconnect from true awareness of who we are. It says when a person falls asleep, it's a 60. It says in the Talmud, it's like a 60th of dying. There's different levels of sleeping. There's when somebody's in a coma. They're to a certain extent they're dead. A certain part of they're much less alive than someone who is actually alive. So when somebody is asleep, there is a certain move towards that direction of being not alive, not being who we are. Similarly, when we block off in our awareness a certain part of ourselves, we are not in ourselves. We're not fully alive. Chachma, it says in Kohelet, Chachma techaya. Chachma gives life. Because when our Chachma is awake, when that part of ourselves is alive, is aware and awake, we are alive. We are in ourselves. We are fully aware of every single thing that we are doing, and we will not go against our values even for the smallest thing. We will not go against Hashem even for the smallest thing. But when the Chachma is half asleep, that's when we can fall into mistakes, because we start to compartmentalize and say, this is a big deal, but this is not such a big deal. What's telling us that? That's our dreams. That's not our true self. Go on, David.
So, in my understanding, when the Chachma is awake, that's actually when you're connected.
Sorry.
That's
Yeah.
when you are actually connected to God, and that's when you're holy. And sin is a disconnection from God, and it's the same thing. The Hakma is not awake. I think it's just another way of saying everything that we say in other words about holiness and sin. It's just the mechanism through the first of the Sephirot that of where our connection comes from, our realization of the connection comes from. That's my understanding. You know, as I listen to that, that's what comes to me.
We sin because that part of us is covered up.
And when it's covered up, we are disconnected from God in our, which means we're not in the holy place. We are in the place of sin. So it's just a mechanism by which that happens, in my understanding.
Yeah, mechanism in how we disconnect from Hashem.
Yeah.
The point over here is not the negative.
But what I'm saying is, but that level of awareness, almost no one has that ability to be that aware. That is something that's like when you're tapped in that way, you're not in any of your old habits. You're not in any of your trauma responses. You're not living off the past. You're just here. And that's a very high level of capacity that the Rebbe was living in that, but there's probably very few others in this world that do.
Not a high level according to Tanya. According to Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says that this thing is close to you. Every single person is able to not sin because we remind ourselves who we truly are.
But to be connected to Chachma, moment to moment to moment, I think is different.
Maybe to be feeling Chachma.
Yeah, to be driven by it, by be acting from that is what I think the highest tzaddiks are doing. I don't think it's the same thing. I think what we're talking about here is different.
Okay, maybe. Ultimately, what's happening is that what we're talking about over here, I didn't realize how late it was. I'm sorry. Just give me 2-3 more minutes just to bring all this together. We're talking over here about the redemption coming out of that. So there's no father involved because the father is sleeping. Chachma is asleep. But what we're talking about over here is coming out of that. Here, what happened was the person ended up. Not a Jew can never be in a situation where their chachma is gone. We're always connected to Hashem. So that's why they're not serving idols. They're working for idols. They're not actually doing the thing which is complete opposite of themselves. That's a big value. That's impossible to do. But they are in the lowest place, which is they've put themselves, they've been sleeping for so long that they've ended up in this situation where they've had to sell everything, they've had to borrow, and now they're working not only for a non-Jew, but to prepare the stuff for the idols. And here the Torah tells us, eventually they're going to get redeemed. No such thing as they're going to be stuck forever, either in the Jubilee year, but hopefully before that. Hopefully if a person is imprisoned inside of themselves, we can't redeem ourselves from our own imprisonment always. It says, Ein chavash matters as, but somebody who's in prison can't unchain himself. They need somebody else to unchain them. That's why we need to have other people to help us out, other people to connect with. Who are those people that are going to help us connect with ourselves? The closest people to us, the people that are most connected to our core, our family members, our closest family members. But the point is not that we should be reliant on others. The point is that eventually we should come to a place that hisika yadov v'nigal, that we can do it ourselves. We have it in our own. We have the money. We have the ability. So it's all part of the same process spiritually. It's not different, disconnected parts, the brother and the cousin and the uncle. It's that those parts of ourselves are revealed. That those parts of ourselves are revealed through our close communities and relatives, that eventually we're able to do it ourselves. We have the strength to be strong, to be secure, and not to end up in such a situation again.
So could you say that really what he's saying about Nigal, it's not really about not becoming a physical slave, but becoming connected, returning to God. So maybe it's not about, maybe this isn't just about the physicality of it, but that you become a slave when you lost connection with God. And so
Exactly.
though,
You become a slave to the lowest thing.
right, but then
You'll never be a slave to the idol. You'll be a slave to the non-Jew that serves the idol. The idol is too far. A Jew can never become a slave to that.
right, but what I'm saying is that if you think about this spiritually, that maybe it's not about becoming a physical slave, but just going down, spiritually, and then Ohisiga Yadov Nigal means when the person reconnects.
Yes, exactly. That's what it is.
Oh, it's not about whether he got the money or not. It's about returning in a way.
And the Kabbalistic explanation, that we're talking about. So in the Sod, in that dimension, the esoteric dimension of the Torah, or the Midrash, the Midrash side of the Torah, we can see it from in that way, that after other people help us untie ourselves, we can't untie ourselves. Then the point is, the biggest mitzvah is not to give charity. So the biggest mitzvah is to lend another Jew money, to help another Jew, to become a partner with another Jew in business. Because then we make them self-sustained. We don't make them reliant on others anymore. So the point is that we help each other out, not just for the purpose of helping or being codependent, but making each person self-sustained, that they're able to have the tools and the abilities to reconnect with that true core of inner self, of Chachma, which says, no, even the smallest thing, even disobeying this sabbatical year, I'm not going to do it, because that's the beginning of a dangerous path, which ends up who knows where. So anything which is disconnected from Hashem's will is bad. And we never know what it can lead for. Avera Agora Tavera. One bad deed brings another one. One mitzvah brings another one. But once we have that awareness and we help other people help us come to that awareness, and we're able to integrate it ourselves, that is the purpose. That is what we're trying to go towards. That's the name of the parsha is Bahar, which means on the Mount Sinai, to remind us, if we have to keep in our minds that Hashem is giving us the ability. This is not coming from ourselves. Hashem gave us the Torah. Hashem gives us the strength that we could do this. We could do it ourselves. We have the strength to be fully sustained ourselves, but sometimes we have to get helped out by others first, after ending up in such a situation. So it's never too late. It's never a lost opportunity. And I'm very sorry for going so long over time.
I'm okay. I have another 5 minutes even before my next meeting, so
There's more details over here, but that's the basic idea. It's I'm realizing myself as I'm saying it over that there's a lot of depth over here. It's very relevant in a lot of ways.
You can say that about any pasuk almost in the Bible.
Yeah. If everything we see and experience is a lesson in our serving Hashem, how much more so a verse in Torah? So it's not just the Baal Shem Tov says anything that you see, everything that you come in contact with is a lesson, something to learn from it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be occurring to us. It's for sure to put a verse in the Torah. Yep. So I invite you all to join us tomorrow for Lag BaOmer, 5 to 7 p.m. outdoors or indoors, wherever you want. Chabad. We're gonna have a barbecue, maybe a little bonfire.
Yeah, I don't know that, but thank you.
Roasted marshmallows, if you like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Happy Lag BaOmer. All the best. Bye now.
Thank you.
Hag Sameach. Thank you.
Thanks so much.